Do hear the fire alarm. The exits are clearly marked. If you do need assistance, if you wait at the top of the stairs, colleagues from Unison will support you downstairs. Can I remind colleagues not to use the lift in the event of any fire alarm, but we have no planned fire alarms today. We do have construction outside, which, as you heard just at the start, they've started, lunch is probably over, so we might have a bit of disruption, but we will do our best to try and minimise the sound from that. Your programme, you've got, hopefully you picked your programme up as you arrive today. You'll see there's a number of speakers. I'll introduce each of the speakers when they take to the rostrum to speak. I won't go through the programme at this minute. You'll know that in terms of housekeeping, the toilets are on each floor, just as you, next to the kitchen where you had your teas and coffees. So if you need to, please make use of the toilets there. And there is also some access toilets on the ground floor, but also the toilets on this floor have accessibility there as well. When you came in, when you signed in, you would have seen the small slip here that indicates if you want to keep appraised and up to date with Unison's campaign around the National Care Service, we will need you to complete this form, and if you could do that and leave it at the back, that would be hugely helpful. And again, today, at the break, if you do want to sign a letter to your MSP, again, there's that facility at the back with the laptops that are available. So I think that's all the housekeeping arrangements. It will get quite hot in here, so we might keep some of the doors open if that's okay, because we are keeping the windows closed because of the noise. I do want to, colleagues, just spend a wee bit of time just to highlight some of the concerns that Unison has around the National Care Service, and also to pick some of the points that we've raised in our submission. And I know colleagues today will also talk about their concerns that they have and some of the points that they've raised in their submissions. Unison Scotland is not opposed to a National Care Service. Priorities, and we have campaigned for a National Care Service over many years. The proposals outlined in the bill do not meet the expectation of Unison Scotland or its membership, and frankly do not meet the expectation of the vulnerable people that we serve within our communities, and that's why we're opposed to the direction of Scottish Government in terms of the approach that they are taking. We're asking for the withdrawal of the bill, and we're asking for that to happen immediately so that we can engage with the Scottish Government, with the trade unions, with the councils, with the NHS, and with the sectors involved in care within Scotland, so that we can develop a National Care Service from the bottom up. Grassroots approach to National Care Service that puts people before profit and that absolutely is akin to the NHS. So a not-for-profit approach is what we're looking for. We believe that taking money out of care is immoral, shouldn't happen, and that any money generated in care should be put directly back into the service so that care can be provided within Scotland. The bill does not create the care service that we want, neither does it create the National Care Service that the public want and deserve. The framework created by the bill preserves the profit in care. That is, the shareholders will continue to take top slice of their profit, and any monies that are left will go into delivering care. That has a significant consequence, not only for people who are receiving care, but for those that provide care. We want a National Care Service that recognises the Fair Work principles. The Fair Work principles of effective voice, of opportunity, of fulfilment, of security and respect. Scottish Government are committed to Fair Work First, which identifies the principles of the Fair Work Convention. We're not asking for something that the Scottish Government have not already signed up to, but what we're asking for is for that to be implemented immediately. We do not need a National Care Service for sectoral bargain. We do not need a National Care Service to provide for workers what they deserve. We can do that right now. So withdraw the bill. Make sure that we engage directly with Unison and the trade unions and the sector, and make sure that we have a National Care Service akin to the National Health Service that we can absolutely all support and rally around. So, Can I just ask, firstly, can I welcome colleagues who are speaking today? And can I ask our first speaker to go to the rostrum? Rachel is the Chief Executive of the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland. Rachel, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian, and I'm really delighted to be here. I will do my best to do the fishwife voice over the drilling, but thank you for the invitation. It's great to have an opportunity at this really important time before the full parliamentary process kicks off on this bill to come and share thoughts which may be very similar in some places and not so much in others. And I think that diversity of voice really matters when we're trying to get to the heart of a transformation agenda, which we all know is being described as the biggest public sector reform that we've seen in Scotland, and we have seen a few recently. So I am Rachel, I am the Chief Exec of CCPS. CCPS represents and works with just over 90 members who are third sector not-for-profit social care providers. Between them, they work with just over 250,000 people in any one year. And we have done a lot of work over the last 2 years on the whole issue of social care reform. And I've been with CCPS since the beginning of July, and I'd really credit the team and my predecessor with getting us to the point we are now on the bill. Now, before I get into the detail of our response to the National Care Service, let me be clear from the outset that we are clear the status quo can't continue. We support reform with purpose. There are too many stories of people unable to access the care and support they need, too little choice and control in practice, too many providers struggling with recruitment, retention, and overheads, and there is still far too much unmet need in our communities. And we still have a model of social care which is about avoidance of hospital rather than underpinning people's aspirations for life and the principles of independence. So that's the landscape that the NCS lands in. And since Derek Feely published the independent review of adult social care, the cost of living pressures, of course, have heaped up. So we now have a real crisis of sustainability, which isn't going to be solved by the promise of jam tomorrow in a few years' time. And just as providers are struggling to keep their heads above water, there is a massive call on our time and resource to engage in this co-design process. So it's a big challenge that we're facing at this point in time. Now, whilst the full impact of any fiscal event, mini budgets or budgets, whenever they may take place down south, is certainly not clear to us, there are big investment decisions that Scotland is going to have to make. But I want to go back a bit first. When Derek Feely published his review, CCPS was pretty optimistic. Perhaps we maybe even surprised ourselves with our level of enthusiasm. And goodness knows, at the time, during COVID, the sector needed some hope. But since then, through the government consultation to the publication of the bill to now, our enthusiasm and hope have ebbed somewhat. We have significant concerns about the direction of travel set out in the bill, though we remain committed to productive debate on how to reach a place of positive reform that we all want to see. So that takes me to where we think the NCS should start. And we think it should start with a coherent model of change. And we felt that the process set out so far didn't make that clear enough. So just after I started over the summer, we wrote our own. Now, I was going to put it on a screen, but it's very small to read. So I encourage you all to go to the CCPS website, CCPS Scotland. And on the front page, you will see a little click through to National Care Service where you'll be able to view our model of change. But I'm going to touch on some of the most important parts of that model of change as I speak. Now, the main point behind our model of change is that it starts with culture, not structures, people, not structures. And we think that is what is going to drive the change that we want to see. So I'm going to talk a bit later about how we're using the model. But back to the specific bill, we did put in a pretty comprehensive response, not as comprehensive maybe as COSLA's. I think you may have got the award for the longest consultation response, but it was really comprehensive. And that's because we want to stay in dialogue. And I'm going to summarize some of our key points. This is a work in progress for us, just like it is for everyone. And we're still working through step by step the detail of what the bill will mean for providers and for the people who need care and support to live their life to the full. And we are working through whether that primary legislation will help us in Scotland get to the change that we want to see, that we've expressed in our own model of change. So there's work to do. but we already have a number of key questions and concerns that I want to set out for you today. First, we think the bill shows a significant drift from the Feely review. Two examples of this are in the national governance structure and in the move to ethical commissioning and procurement. So Derek Feely's vision was of a diverse national board, including those with lived experience, the workforce, providers, has disappeared in favour of a much more NHS-style governance arrangement. And we think that's a huge loss, particularly given the government's emphasis on co-design through this process. And the bill uses the words of ethical commissioning, and that's great. CCPS has led a lot of the work on driving forward a move to ethical commissioning, but really says little and does next to nothing to reform procurement law. So we want to find now ways to bridge the gap between our position at CCPS and what ethical commissioning could be and how it could support the sector, and the bill with its positive options for legislative change. Now, we appreciate that primary legislation is necessarily focused on duties and powers, and indeed should only frame those things which require legislation to enact. But this bill has moved to a centralising command and control model, which we think is at odds with Feely, at odds with our model of change, at odds with the government emphasis on co-design, and at odds with the ethos of social care, which is rooted in personal choice and control. Now, the government has set a great store by the message that the consultation showed an overwhelming majority of responses in favour of ministerial accountability. Yes, but that does not in and of itself justify the approach in the bill as a whole as drafted. Now, we are concerned that the focus, and let's be frank, there will be major disagreements between local and national government about structural control, that the bill itself will overshadow the potential of Feely for collaborative approaches and the importance of individuals and families being at the heart of reform. So in our change model, we make a particular point about the need for a model which enhances what we call subsidiarity to the individual. So what do I mean? We think you need to start at the frontline relationship, place decisions there first, then only delegate upwards to localities, those things which can't be decided in a relationship at the front line, and then only delegate up to local authority or then to national level those decisions that are left. But we aren't starting the legislation that way round. We're starting with structure, but structure should be a means to an end, and we are not clear enough that the end is clear enough, hence our model of change. And we're not alone, having looked through many of the responses to Parliament, in thinking that the bill is just not clear. Now, we understand that government wants room to manoeuvre by having a framework bill with detail left to secondary legislation, which is much easier to change. And there is a real place for that as an approach. But there is so much in here that's not clear. We are being asked to make a huge leap of faith. And with too much left unanswered, many of us will be looking to amend the bill with good reason, and I put our hand up, we probably will be among them, with the risk that we end up with an unworkable patchwork of provision. And of course, secondary legislation, which will set out much of the detail, simply does not get the same level of parliamentary scrutiny as a primary legislation the bill does. And we think that's a real risk here. We do think the principles in the bill are important and contain some important nods to a direction of travel that matches to some important elements of our model. They do miss out some key elements of what we think the key purpose of a national care service should be, including consistency in access and quality, the point that we've made about subsidiarity to the individual, and an important point around parity between system partners. I think the application of the principles within the legislative framework is also interesting. It leaves a lot of scope for ministers to decide whether or not those principles have been applied to their core duty, which is about promoting a national care service. We're also questioning whether there's bite in the principles and in the charter for people in the end who are receiving care or people caring for those receiving care, particularly as we will have a charter of rights that explicitly conveys no new rights. And then finally, sustainability. So there are nods to this, but too little to truly set out a framework for duties around funding the front line. Now, some of you may have seen the work that CCPS commissioned Fraser of Allender to do on costs. If you haven't, it's available on their website. It's a really helpful read. But we are clear there isn't enough in investment on actual social care and support. And the costs for things like the shared health and social care record, which we certainly agree really matters if we're going to make this work, aren't clear enough either. And I come back to Lillian's point about fair work. Does the financial memorandum genuinely cover the costs of fair work principles, particularly given that third sector staff, people involved in the providers we work with, are moving ever further from parity, giving ongoing offers around public sector pay and announcements about the real living wage? So is this reform affordable? And I think that's a question that's become ever sharper over the last month. So we've got many, many questions, a considerable number of concerns. We don't have all the answers for sure, but having said everything here, we want to now spend some time applying our model of change with integrity, and that includes in our own ongoing commitment to try and find a way through this collaboratively. So I come back to where I started. Our model of change and the current pressures on third sector providers. The model of change is our vision for reform, and we are now doing the work to overlay this on the bill. The question is simple: will the bill help us get there? And if not, could it? We will continue a pretty forensic bit of work through this month, doing that in advance of committee evidence starting. But second, with such acute pressures facing the sector, we are also asking what change could and should be made right now without legislation, without complex structural change, without tugs of war over who runs what, but will mean we have a viable sector to move towards the aspirations of a national care service, because the decisions we make now will set the foundations for what comes next. So I hope that gives you an overview of where we were at. We really are delighted to be here because it's very much part of what we want to do, which is engage in the debate. We really think there's an opportunity to get something right here. We now just need to work out exactly how we do that together and what that is. Thank you very much.
Rachel, thank you very much for that fantastic contribution. I'm going to take all of the speakers, and you'll see from your programme that we will take a break and we'll come back for a panel session thereafter. So I'm not going to take questions at this point. So can I ask our next speaker to go to the rostrum? Nick from Commonwealth. Nick, you are very welcome, and we look forward to your contribution.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. Right, I think we need to remember that the proposals for the National Care Service came out of COVID, when our care system, the flaws in it were exposed as never before, and it collapsed. We completely lost sight of that, right, in what has happened since. And actually, the Scottish Government only committed to a National Care Service because of those flaws in COVID. And that's absolutely, it is vital. There was a vision for a better world, and we don't want to lose that, right? What happened after that is, when the Scottish Government made that commitment, is I think most people sat back and trusted government to get on with the job, right? So they left it to government and waited to see what would come up. First of all, the Feely review. I'll disagree slightly with the previous speaker on that. I think it was full of fine words, but didn't say very much. And we said that, and Commonweal produced a critique. But what happened in Commonweal, and there's a group, and I would call us grumpy old skeptics, right? Many of whom are of a socialist bent, I suppose. Well, what we decided is that we weren't going to leave it all up to government to come up with things. So we produced this, Caring for All, an alternative vision for a national care service. Now, why that's important, I wouldn't want people here, wouldn't expect anyone to agree with everything that's in here, not at all, right? But the whole point of this is, there is an alternative to a national care service. We could develop an alternative, and actually the people in the room have the potential to develop these ideas further and present an alternative to what the government is currently proposing. Now, since we produced Caring for All, what has become clearer, and something that I didn't fully appreciate before, is that the Scottish Government does not have the expertise to create a national care service, right? Government has been hollowed out, right? They don't have and a small illustration of this is what's happened. They put out a contract over the summer to seek VAT advice on the proposed structure, the VAT implications of the proposed national care service. Now, after what happened with the fire brigade and the police, it's absolutely incredible that government never even thought about the VAT implications before coming up with this proposal for care boards. Absolutely crazy. But what they've done, and that lack of expertise, and what's not being said enough at the moment, is what they did is they pulled in private sector companies, KPMG, people will know that, and behind the scenes, behind all this fluff about lived experience, the real design of the National Care Service is being done by people whose interests are totally different to ours, right? And we need to expose what is going on, right? So I'm not here going to talk about our response to the NCS bill. It's on our website. What I'm delighted to say, though, is many of the points that we made, right, are shared by other responses to the bill. And the important thing about this is that there is growing realization now that the care service is very flawed. My appeal to everyone is don't sit back and wait to see what the government comes up next. Let's go onto the front foot, right? And let's actually say what is needed, right? So what I'm then going to say is, I think one of the things that's preventing this from happening, if you like, is what I would call there are a number of social policy shibboleths that have completely dominated care discourse, sorry to use that term, over the last 20 years. So we have a whole lot of things and they're being used to sell this vision of a national care service and make it sound good, right? So we have lots of things, postcode lottery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to deal with a couple of those right now, and I think we need to go onto the offensive about them. So the first one is rights-based services, right? Now, there's not a single person in the room who you won't get to sign up, or the population of Scotland who won't sign up to rights-based services. Human rights, absolutely essential. But what happened during the COVID crisis? Well, human rights of people in care services were trampled over as never before. And who was at the centre of doing that? The Scottish government that now wants to take control of the National Care Service in order to so-called pursue human rights. It's all nonsense. We've had in Scotland rights-based services, talk about that, policies about it for 20 plus years. It has delivered absolutely nothing. Right? Now, what we need to do about that, in our view, is we need to get back to talking about need. I was delighted that some of the voluntary sector providers say actually the best thing, the most important thing for the National Care Service to do is to look at unmet need in Scotland and how that can be resourced. And we just need one simple right. People whose needs are unmet need to have a right to a service, right? Everything else, we should stop trying to proceduralize practice. If staff, right, with lots of things, you'll follow this and that rights guidance. If we actually resource staff properly to have the time to work with people and they had the right training, most of the rights issues in terms of respect and so on would be resolved. We really could have co-production, right? So the answer to that isn't legislation or yet more government policy. It's devolving and empowering people at the front line to come up with solutions. I just want to, my second shibboleth that I would just want to deal with is integration, right? Integration, again, it's a fantastic word, right? But the integration of adult social care and primary health care actually means the disintegration of local authorities and the NHS as we know it, right? And what the government hasn't explained is how all those people working in the NHS, acute NHS, is going to work effectively with primary care. God knows there's enough problems at the moment, and how all those other services in local authorities are going to work effectively across the piece. Now, the point is, whatever organizational structure you have, people have to work across boundaries. Right now, what I would just say on this, and I think this is absolutely as a social worker years ago, right, we used to work with people in health and all sorts of other professions without any problems at all. Right, we didn't need management to tell us to work with other people. We knew that was the right thing to do. And in fact, what's happening is you've got the most professionalized bit of the workforce, social workers, allied health professionals, GPs, who actually, by their training and things, should know that it's really important to work each other and know the right thing to do, are then being put into management structures which top-down managers are telling them what to do. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's the last thing that we need integrated. The thing that we do need integrated, and this is in terms of this, is we need the private sector integrated. Because I'll tell you, as a commissioner, trying to try and tell the private sector what to do when the owners are managed by money, you absolutely can't do it, right? If we're talking about an integrated care service, we need one integrated care service, get rid of the private sector, and then linked to that, and what's very important is we need to stop this nonsense about children's services somehow being separate from adult services. We need an integrated care service, right? And I think it's very worrying what the review that the government's just set up about children's services. So I'm very aware of time. Can I say something about ethical commissioning? Just right. Ethical commissioning is another of those shibboleths. Actually, it's a misnomer. What the government's talking about is ethical procurement. You can't have ethical procurement. It doesn't work. Now, I know too, some of the voluntary sector have welcomed, right, the proposal in the bill to reserve contracts. And I just want to certain types of organisation. And I just want to point out to people that under the Self-Directed Support Act, right, councils or HSCPs or care boards will not be able to do it, because as long as people have a legal right to choose services, they have a legal right to choose to have a service from the private sector. And what that means is you cannot reserve a contract. You just can't do it unless you change those other bits of law. So we really have got to, what that shows is I think we've got to have a complete rethink about where we're going on ethical commissioning too. So just to finalise, what I'd like to say is, I mean, I'd spent in the care reform group at Commonweal. We've spent the last 2 years talking about care. I used to be a social work manager, and I'll tell you, the people on the group and some of them in the audience here have really challenged me, right, to change how I think and to think out of the box. A lot of things I believed 3 years ago, I no longer believe. My appeal here is that people actually who are in the audience also are prepared to get out of the box. I've not stopped learning, and that means so councils need to start admitting all the things that they've done wrong, right? If they're going to get support for public care, they need to admit things that have gone wrong and to talk about how they might devolve, create subsidiarity. We need the voluntary sector to admit that sometimes, actually, in terms of treating staff and so on, they've been as bad as the private sector. We need the trade unions to cease seeing this as being a matter of pay and conditions only and think, well, actually, if our members are going to be co-designing services, we've got to get interested in all those other things too. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nick. Very thought-provoking contribution, and I'm sure we'll get a number of questions from the floor around some of those points that you've raised. Can I keep us going, colleagues, and ask Councillor Paul Kelly, who is the Health and Social Care spokesperson from COSLA. Sorry, no, you okay? Paul, could you go to the Russian, please, and make your contribution? Thanks.
Thanks, Lily. Can everybody hear okay? I'm just conscious nobody's asked that so far. Brilliant. Well, thanks for organising today, Unison. I think it's really, really important that we have events like this because, as the speakers are outlining, and as everybody's outlining, just how important National Care Service is, the bill is, and the impact it'll have on so many people that we all work with or represent. So it's really good to have events like this, I think, to come together, to have these discussions, to hear from different speakers, which is, from COSLA's point of view, it's really interesting to hear from the different organisations. Difficult to follow yourself there from Commonweal, fantastic contribution, but it was really good to be here, and thanks for allowing us to be here. Before I give you the view of the bill and legislation, I want to focus on the issues first, and I'm going to start with the positive vision, the aspiration for what most of us in this room want, for social work, for social care and community health. I'm then going to bring it back to where we currently are, and likely bring a bit more realism and talk to the challenges we face before addressing the National Care Bill service itself. Care and social work should serve to enhance people's lives and build on their strengths and abilities and support people to thrive within their communities. The delivery of these high-quality services can only succeed with valued, empowered and skilled staff. Staff across social care deserve fair pay for fair work. Social care workers deserve appropriate recognition and reward as a skilled workforce predominantly made up of women who look after some of our most vulnerable citizens. Social workers too deserve recognition for the crucial role they play in holding the fabric of our communities together. Social workers should have fair workloads, ample opportunities to develop and progress in their professional careers, and also to be afforded the ability to focus on early intervention rather than move from crisis to crisis. I know many people in this room will be used to the term of early intervention and prevention. And we're now more than a decade on from the Christie Commission, which emphasised this principle, but it remains more important than ever to reiterate it. A restrictive focus on our care system and treating problems and crises alone is simply not sufficient. We continue to articulate that local government is central here to improving the social determinants of health, to focus on prevention, to strengthen community wellbeing, public health and independence, rather than only address illness or difficulties faced later down the line. The third sector here too plays a key role throughout our communities, often being uniquely placed to offer specialist support tailored to particular groups of people. Ambitions for a person-centred, preventative approach to care require a community-led approach to service design and delivery, one which recognises the significance of place. Social work in particular plays a pivotal role in making and retaining social connections in our local communities and supporting people to live happy, dignified, safe and fulfilling lives. In social care, we should continue to build on providing care with people remaining in their homes or community setting, helping individuals retain their meaningful life connections. I'll now turn to our current context. Do our aspirations for care and support always meet the current reality of service users, staff and partners even? No, they don't. Early this year, Social Work Scotland's Setting the Bar report spotlighted a profession where committed social workers have struggled under the weight of high caseloads, of having to work in a wait times that feels counter to their values. Through the pandemic in recent years, it's difficult to put into words the enormous lengths the social work workforce and social care workers have went to in supporting people all across our communities. However, despite this, despite the very hard work and dedication of staff, there are still members of our communities who haven't had the personalised support we'd like them to be able to receive, and that is so crucial to maintaining a good quality of life. And a big part of this is down to resource. After nearly a decade of sustained real-term cuts to local government from central government, we have tried to protect the communities as much as possible. So while council budgets have declined by 4.3% since 2013, local government has sought to protect care and has actually increased real-term spending by 13%. But there can be no underestimating the strain that these budget cuts have placed on our services, our staff, and the people accessing support throughout our communities. And we're aware that there could be further budget cuts, as previously was mentioned, and that councils could face. But we are striving to make improvements. COSLA and indeed local government are committed to improving pay and terms and conditions so that our social care workforce feels truly valued for the work they do. We've committed to working to remove charging for non-residential care services, to applying ethical commissioning principles, to designing new criteria for an entitlement-based model of care. And we're committed to improving support to unpaid carers, to improving the voice of those with lived experience in services. And to us, these changes are too important to wait on a national care service. Now we come to the National Care Service Bill itself. And you'll not be surprised to learn that council leaders and COSLA have serious concerns about this legislation. The first question we should ask ourselves with regards to this bill is, will it improve the frontline service? Will it improve the experience of staff, of service users and of partners? There are some areas within the bill that would make important improvements to care and to support, for example, Anne's Law and the strengthened support for carers. However, as the financial memorandum lays bare, the bill and its accompanying financial memorandum do not give support to increasing pay or improving terms and conditions for adult social care staff and commission services. The financial memorandum explicitly doesn't cover increasing investment in social work services or removing charging for non-residential care or an increasing provision for early intervention and prevention. Given the bill isn't committing money to make these improvements, we're left to focus on what it explicitly does give rise to, and a large part of that is the centralisation and transfer of local government staff functions and assets to a national structure under the guidance of ministers. Though there is not a great deal of detail within the bill, from what is outlined, we know ministers will be empowered to create, direct or disband care boards. We know that ministers will be empowered to appoint and to remove members of these care boards. And what we don't know under these circumstances is how these care boards will be accountable to communities, nor even which communities they are likely to serve. The impact of the centralisation contained within the bill means uncertainty for 75,000 staff who are now left not knowing whether they're to be transferred to a new government body. And what we also don't know is what this transfer may mean for existing terms and conditions, for years of continued service, or for pension arrangements. This centralisation and removal of local accountability is an attempt to improve the delivery of local services. It's without evidence as to how it will actually improve the quality and delivery of care and support on the ground. This bill risks detaching social work, care and community health services from education, from schools, from local welfare and housing services. The bill risks the hard work towards health and social care integration that has been progressed through recent years. And the bill risks the ability for an individual to receive holistic support to improve their circumstances. From the local government perspective, we recognise the challenges that staff and service users face. And we've been clear that we seek to lead on reform and improvements to the system now. We don't want to wait years of untested and expensive bureaucratic changes. We want the Scottish Government to put the additional money into frontline services now. We question the Government's prioritisation of committing £500 million per year of fresh funding on the running costs of the new National Care Service, when that money would be better spent helping people in our system and care sector cope with the cost of living crisis that we're facing. On top of recurring annual costs, the Financial Memorandum Bill outlines how the Government plans to spend £250 million on setting up the National Care Service alone. £250 million. And I'm sure all of us in this room could think of better ways to spend that money in helping people right now. So to conclude, we don't believe the Scottish Government's bill, as presented, is the right approach and is sufficiently evidenced. We're committed to a vision for services which empower people, empower staff, and empower communities. And we're focused on helping people access and deliver frontline services now. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you very much again, an excellent contribution. I'm keeping this going, colleagues, trying to gather up some more time. And can I ask Tanith Mullen, the Parliamentary and Campaigns Officer for Scotland, Parkinson's UK. Tanith.
Okay, thanks everybody. Can you hear me at the back? I'm actually quite short and I'm not sure that the microphone's picking me up, so can I have a wave? Right, brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. This is a slightly unusual place for me to find myself at Parkinson's UK. So I'm afraid I'm going to talk you a bit through why this matter is and this bill is so important to us. So I'm aware that people don't know a lot about Parkinson's, so I can tell you there's about 12,500 people with the condition in Scotland, with about 30 new people getting a diagnosis every week. And of those people, there's a real bias towards people of older age. So 6 in 7 of our population are aged over 65 and 1 in 3 are aged over 80. There are more than 40 recognised symptoms of Parkinson's. You can see them there. It's not just about a tremor or movement disorder symptoms, which you might be familiar with. There's significant mental health aspects, and those can be very, very serious, as well as things like bladder and bowel problems, and restless legs, movement falls, and so on. So everyone's different, but after about 5 years with Parkinson's, about half of people need support with their day-to-day living. Now, we're in the unmet need category, so lots of people aren't getting that. That's their families and their partners providing that. And after 10 years, nearly everybody needs help with support with daily living. This is a really highly vulnerable population. If you look at a group, 1 in 3 people with Parkinson's have dementia. Many more have other kinds of thinking problems. There's a really high rate of hospital admissions. We're talking about 4,000 plus hospital admissions a year from this population, and most of those people are going through A&E before they end up wherever they end up. So these people are on that borderline between social care and primary care and A&E care, which all comes into the National Care Service. 1 in 5 people with Parkinson's are defined as high resource individuals. That's a really unpleasant way that we talk about the people who between them make up 50% of health and social care, health and community spend in the community. And as I've said, the informal care needs that this population provides are really high, and they are too often not met by our system. I feel I should put myself into context. We've talked a bit about the third sector today, and as you can see from that, we've got a very small staff team, a heck of a lot of volunteers, but we're not a service provider in the way that the third sector is often characterized in this debate. There are third sector providers providing really good services, but that's not us. We provide information and support to people with Parkinson's, but we don't directly provide care. So we're coming from outside of that perspective with what we're saying. But we do work with the health and social care workforce through a thing called the UK Parkinson's Excellence Network, which provides training resources for people who are on the front end of working with people with these potentially quite complex needs. And we also do the kind of thing I'm doing now, so talking about policy, doing a bit of campaigning, raising awareness and sharing information. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we are with this bill. It's a pile, essentially, of blank paper. And that's what we're really concerned about, because, frankly, if we're going to have the biggest public sector reform since devolution, our Parliament needs to be scrutinising that. And on the basis of what's been presented right now, our Parliament can't scrutinise what the proposals are going to be, because we don't know what they are. And these are not small matters. You know, we know that there are going to be health and social care boards from the bill. We know that there are going to be more than one because they're plural. We've got no idea how many there are going to be, where they're going to cover, how they're going to interact with the NHS boards, who's going to be on them, what voting rights people are going to have, where's the funding coming from to actually build the investment that we need? How is it going to deal with the unmet need that we've been left with after COVID, when people who already needed care have deteriorated, people who didn't need care before have moved into a point where they now need care, and where we've got a whole and potentially unknowable population of people developing care needs as a result of long COVID that isn't being accommodated by these plans. For people with Parkinson's, as I've said, they're on the edge of all of these services, the social care services into the NHS and the bits of the current NHS which are coming under the social care service, but they're also potentially getting highly specialised care from acute services through neurology. How is that person receiving all of those potential aspects of care going to move through this incredibly complex new system? There's no information about how those needs are going to be met and joined up in the new system that we have, and we're really worried about it. It's also really unclear for the staff. So people with Parkinson's don't tend to get involved with debates about who's providing their care. They just want the people who are providing their care to be good at their job, to understand Parkinson's, and to provide them with the care that they need. But they also want the people providing that care to be treated with respect, to get the pay and conditions that they deserve, and to be given the space to provide the care that they need. Now, in that context, we have to ask how the prolonged uncertainty about the fate of all kinds of people in this workforce really helps with the pressing issues of recruitment and retention that the care system and the NHS currently face. Because we think that there's a circle that is unsquarable there. We're also really interested in looking at the important principles, and we've heard a lot about these. So co-design is really important. It's in the lifeblood of what we do, to work with the people who are receiving support to find out what it is that they want, what it is they need, and make sure it's delivered. All of this is important stuff, but it's not completely subordinate to accountability and transparency. We also need a system where the co-design that's undertaken is actually subjected to some kind of analysis afterwards, rather than trusting it that there will be an ill-defined co-design process which will suddenly emerge with magical solutions which manage to balance what are competing needs and competing priorities of all of the people that go to make up this very complex system. So where's the scrutiny coming in on the plans that emerge out of this co-design process? We're not seeing it. Who is going to test that the interests of everybody in that system are being properly balanced? Is it just going to be ministers? And to what extent can we trust both the ministers that are currently in place, but also, and this is crucial, any future administration that comes in to actually maintain the services at the level that people need? Because there's so much ministerial power here, and it's not just for the people that we might be seeing on our tellies now. It's over and into the future too. Now, there are several issues missing in action. So when we're looking at the problems that people with Parkinson's and their families tell us about, the lack of provision, the lack of ability to secure a care package, the long waiting times, the inability to get a physio appointment or to speak to somebody who can help you to manage your speech in a way that your family can understand you. Those are issues of resources, not of structures. And there's nothing about how this new system will put those resources into the system. Things that people with Parkinson's and their families care about. The abolition of non-residential care charges, again, kicked into the long grass, not dealt with in this debate, at a time when everybody's income is being squeezed and care charges for people on low incomes are a massive part of the money that they're having to find. Care home self-funding fees, which are roughly 8 times for a self-funder the rate of rent for a one-bedroom private sector flat in Scotland, because the actual level of those fees is so disproportionately out from any conceivable living costs that people would meet in any other setting. Issues around eligibility criteria and how we work out how to balance the fact that already people with severe need are not getting the care they need with the kind of service we heard about that needs to be preventative and stepping in. And also on that borderline of charged for and free at the point of use services, which was not resolved at integration and remains unresolved now, with a number of private contractors like high street pharmacies and others coming in to fill basic NHS functions and charging people. How does that fit with an NHS that's free at the point of use? If you can't get it through the NHS and you're being directed to someone else for your testing and they're charging you for it. And we'd also question the assumption that underpins the bill that the NHS is somehow free of variation. Anybody who has spoken to a community of people living with a long-term condition knows that the NHS is riddled with variation in the care and support it provides, both within and between NHS boards. And it's not clear to us how that's going to be resolved. Some final areas of contradiction, and I'm really conscious of time. We support the areas of human rights and equality and non-discrimination that are laid out in the principles. But this needs to be balanced with another principle that says this is all about reducing care needs. So if you're somebody whose condition is progressive or who is dying with a condition, how do you fit into that? And how did the COVID crisis show that people who are in those situations were dealt with by a government that said it valued human rights? Not very well. And we're concerned about framing social care only as a matter for people getting well, rather than recognizing that it's actually for people who are not getting better but need support to live as well as they can. Ethical commissioning, really welcome, but again in the legislation explicitly it's subordinate to resourcing, which as we said is not addressed. And we welcome, as I said, the principle of co-design. But then if you look onward into the bill, health and social care boards are being given the very lowest standard of consultation in terms of what they need to do to work with local communities to develop and design their services. It's a second stage, you must consult with people, which is very much what we have now. And I think for me and for Parkinson's UK raises real questions about the extent to which co-design is really embedded in the practice of this legislation. So that is it for me. I think I'm more or less on time.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Yes, we're all keeping very well to time. We did start slightly late, that's why we're running behind. Can I ask our next speaker to go to the rostrum, the Chief Exec of Coherence? Ron, you're very welcome.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon speaking on this important subject. I should just say a wee bit about Coherence before I begin. In case you don't know, Coherence is a national charity that provides health and social care services right across Scotland. We employ about 1,600 members of staff. We deliver adult care, children's services. We provide support in relation to epilepsy. It goes on and on. So we're a big organisation, really proud to be part of this conversation. I should also say thanks to UNISON actually for inviting us along today, and it's another partnership that I'm really proud of from a Coherence point of view. We work very constructively with our partners in UNISON. UNISON are the trade union that we partner with, and really keen to work more constructively into the future on that. I think it's really important as well in the context of everything that my colleagues have said around about fair work. Because this is an issue of primary importance to us in Coherence, and I know to the colleagues in UNISON as well. And although there is a strong signal in the National Care Service about that commitment, the work to date, I think, is checkered at best in this regard. So we've had funding arrangements put in place by government, but they're not adequate to actually fund what we actually require in terms of that journey towards fair work. So there's a commitment to £10.50, but the small print here is for adult social care services registered with the Care Inspectorate. That's no use to us in Coherence. We provide children's services, we provide services that are not registered with the Care Inspectorate, and yet as an organisation we can't not deliver equity for our staff. So it's a good start, but we really need to go much further than where we've been to so far. Anyway, I was very aware in coming to you today that I had 4 colleagues speaking before me, and I didn't want to get up and simply replicate everything that had already been said, principally because I know all of the colleagues quite well as well, and are connected in some way or other to the organisation. So I sit on the board of CCPS. Tanith chairs the Neurological Alliance. I sit on that board. I've known Nick for probably 15 years. And although Councillor Kelly, I don't know yourself, I used to work for COSLA for the better part of a decade. So I didn't want to get up here today and simply repeat all that the other colleagues have said, most of which I absolutely agree with. So I wanted to focus in on 2 very specific questions, and I prepared a couple of slides, extremely boring slides I have to add, which will do the trick in terms of keeping me off the BBC News tonight. But I wanted to focus on 2 primary questions, one around about integration. One of the few areas actually that Nick and I disagree on is around integration. And one is around governance that Rachel touched on. So in terms of the issues around about integration, I'm really interested in what government think will happen in relation to this bill in terms of the relationship between the public bodies, principally the NHS and local government, and then the associated issues around about that. So what I've got in the slide there is a quote from the bill itself. It's actually in the UNISON leaflet that is on the seats today, because I know that it's the toupee of staff out of local government is one of the principal concerns that people have. But it's really interesting to me that the provisions in the bill actually explicitly disallow this in relation to the NHS. And I wanted to get beneath that, because there's not really been an explanation as to why that is. And I think personally it creates a real guddle in terms of the national structures around about health and social care. And apologies for talking about structures. These genuinely are really boring slides, but nonetheless, this is an example. You don't need to really see this in too much detail. My previous job, I was the director of a health and social care partnership. And within that structure, I had the advantage of having a management relationship with colleagues that looked after social work, that looked after social care, that looked after primary care, that looked after mental health, and looked after community nursing. And the advantage of that is that together we could really tackle some of the significant challenges that we faced across the health and social care system. You know, whether those were very specific issues like delayed discharge or much more general issues like health inequalities, I felt that coming together as an integrated team really added value for us, and I think we made some progress in that context. The problem I think that this legislation has is that it really creates an argument in favour of disintegration. And the reason for that is that all of the colleagues circled in red there are explicitly disallowed from being part of these new national care board arrangements. To make matters more confusing, the national care boards, the local care boards rather, will have responsibility for primary care in the GP contract. So it really feels like a mess, truthfully, in terms of how this is all coming together. So what does it look like? Again, nobody knows because it's not really being articulated. This is the best that I could come up with, which is that you've got local care boards with commissioning responsibility. The betting money is that we'll see social work staff to pay out of local government into these new local care boards, but that's an issue that's yet to be fully fleshed out. And the relationship between the NHS and between councils will become increasingly challenging. So there will be much less appetite towards integration. So I think that the logical implications of what this bill has produced is deeply problematic in terms of how we integrate services right across Scotland. One of the alternatives, and again, I'm not commending any of these, but I'm just trying to work through the logical implications of this, is that you have some sort of commissioner-provider split, so that these new care boards are purely commissioning. They don't deliver services at all. They hold a commissioning budget and they use that budget to commission services from local government and the NHS. And within that context, you probably still could deliver integrated services. It also avoids big two-pay questions and transference of staff out of local government, for example. But this isn't without challenge either. Not everybody likes the idea of a commissioner-provider split, but it's one way of avoiding that. Another model is to actually create integrated boards that actually deliver services. But again, that's a much more substantial change from where we are just now. It would require the two-paying of NHS staff into that, and it would also require the two-paying of social work staff into it again. So I know that that's something that UNISON are principally focused on. Again, not without challenge. Just a final add-on to that, which is around about the commissioning agenda. The commissioning of social care in this context, I think, is significantly challenged by the thinking that lies behind this. As you know, there is still a reasonably significant number of councils that deliver in-house social care. So it's not all commissioned externally and delivered by the third and independent sectors. A lot of it's still in-house. If councils simply become another provider, there will no longer be parity, or rather, for the first time, there will be parity in terms of competing for services. Now, what does that mean? The reason that the council cost bases are higher is because councils have traditionally paid more. They've paid more because they could afford to, and I'm not letting councils off the hook with this, by the way, because despite having worked for COSLA for a decade, the reason that the third sector doesn't pay as well is because councils don't give the third sector enough money to pay as well. So let's be clear about that. But here's the point: if this all plays out in a new arrangement where councils compete with third sector providers, they will lose when it comes to competitive tenders if we continue to apply these methods of securing services. So what happens after that is that all of the council staff will then transfer by two-pay into the provider that wins the contract. What happens after that is that the provider will not be financially sustainable because they will have a cost base which isn't reflected in the contract price. So this is an example of how flawed I think this proposition is just now. It's this detail, precisely this sort of detail, we need to be thinking through. And I'm sorry, I just don't know that people are applying themselves to these questions in the way that we really need to. So big concerns about that. I just wanted to finish with a couple of points on inclusive governance. Rachel picked it up earlier, and 100% behind her on this. This is a quote from Derek Feely. You may or may not agree with everything that was in the Feely report. National Care Service should have a board of governance with a chair appointed by and accountable to ministers. Its other members must include representation of the workforce, people experienced in social care support, unpaid carers and providers. Very inclusive. Now contrast that with what the policy memorandum says. I don't think there's you could find a more uninspiring paragraph than that. The Scottish Government intends to establish the National Care Service as an executive agency or as part of the core Scottish Government and staffed by civil servants. It will share the legal identity of Scottish ministers. It does not need to, because it doesn't need to be established in the bill itself. That's a cop-out. It's a cop-out because it doesn't involve people in the governance of the social care system in Scotland. And that is a promise that we were given at the beginning of this journey, and the Scottish Government has singly failed to deliver on that. So that needs to change. Well, what would a more inclusive approach look like? So I'm going on the basis here that this will happen. Colleagues today may agree with it, they may not agree with it, but I'm going on the basis that the parliamentary arithmetic means that this will happen. So the question isn't whether it happens, but what it looks like. And so in that context, what is a more inclusive approach? For me, a more inclusive approach does have to involve the establishment of a national board with an independent chair. It does have to involve people who use services. It does have to involve providers like quarriers. By creating a system like that, we stand a greater chance of creating a system which involves people and actually makes better decisions. And the same, by the way, is true at local level. And you can see accountability flows as the bill would intend, but it's done in a way which is far more supportive of organisations in the social care system that are working with people that we support in order to deliver high quality services. So we need to move in this direction. You know, there's a thing, whether this is helpful or not, I don't know, but I think in Scotland, we focus a lot on representative democracy, on what people in the Parliament decide, even perhaps what people in council chambers decide. But participative democracy is the thing that really matters here. It's about citizens coming together to work within this National Care Service so that we can make it ours and not something that belongs to somebody else. That's the prize, and that's what we need to try and achieve. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much. That was a very clear articulation of what's wrong within the current bill as it stands. So thank you for that, and thanks for that demonstration. We will need those slides, you do know that.
Just want to get into the BBC.
Thanks for that. Colleagues, and can I move to our next speaker? And we are very fortunate to have an adult social care worker with us today, a UNISON activist, and Mary Madden. Mary, thank you very much, and could you make your way to the rostrum? Thank you.
I'll need to read my script. Good afternoon, and it's very thankful to be here to speak today on behalf of all my very hard-working colleagues in social care. We have been working exceptionally hard now for years, but in particularly the last 3 years have been horrendous. I have worked in care jobs for well over 20 years now. I've been a steward for over 15. I have to say the person that is responsible for me being a steward is sitting here today. I'll not name them, but anyway, they know who they are. And I've been very involved. Unfortunately, to see things get worse instead of progress has been very difficult. My message to you and to the government is easy. The main problem in care is obvious. The main problem has been obvious for years. The obvious problem that we have faced for years is that services are underfunded, staff are undervalued, and definitely underpaid. The world woke up to the fact that we are undervalued during COVID, And you know what I'm going to say now? They were clapping and cheering for us. Nobody's clapping or cheering now. Project workers are crying though with frustration. We all knew the clapping would stop, but we thought now National Care Service would deliver, and they promised fair work and better services. All that has gone to the dogs. The whole point of a National Care Service is to improve the quality of care in all services and to get that offer to more of the people that need our support. It's really not any more complicated than that. The obvious solution that the government has forgotten is fair work. If care workers were offered good careers, we would keep people in this sector. There would be no staffing crisis. There wouldn't be thousands of vulnerable people waiting for a service. As care workers, we're expected to go through a lot of training, be well qualified, be professional, be registered, and treated like we know nothing. If care work offered good careers, then workers would develop their skills and people would get a better quality of care. As things stand, there isn't the time or the money to build the skill base. And many people with skills leave for better pay elsewhere. And they don't need skills for a lot of the jobs they're going to, but they are better paid. If we focused on better care for a larger number of service users, we could ditch the agenda today for the seminar and fix it the problem in a day, because we all know what has to be done. It's just doing it. But what have we got instead? A shambles. We are fighting over the future of local government when all we actually need is better jobs and better care. We are fighting over the future of social work and children's services when all we need is better jobs and better care. And we are fighting over the future of public services while tax dodging companies and private consultants breathe easy because the new system places profit before people. Need before greed, it should be. The founders of the NHS are remembered as heroes. People with vision who built quality services, caring for Scottish people from cradle to grave. Let's be very clear. If anyone remembers the architects of this shambles, they will be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The legacy of this government will be further investment in tax avoidance, the breakup of local democracy, and putting profit before people. But these services belong to us, and I am here to reclaim the agenda for me and my colleagues. Yes, I stand in solidarity. Yes, I stand in solidarity with union colleagues to protect council workers. But my personal priority is another group of workers. Yes, I also believe in local democracy and the important roles of local councils. But I am here to speak for contracted services. I am here to speak for the lowest paid. My priority is the folk at the bottom of the heap. The folk who have been treated poorly for years. The people who have had services underfunded, outsourced, and overlooked for years. The workers who do long hours, overtime, overnights, just to get a living wage. And that's not counting the hours that we do buckshe, because that is inevitable. You keep doing it. We're reminded constantly of duty of care. Duty of care, unfortunately, doesn't provide for our own families. The workers who do long hours, overtime and overnights just to get a living wage. The folk who worked through the carnage of COVID and did what they always do, they put the service first. Personally, I worked, should have been retired, but I still worked through COVID. I was still in the front line. I had to segregate at home so as I wouldn't cross-contaminate from house to our service. You were there all the time. You appeared to be appreciated, and we thought something was changing, but really has it. The folk who worked through the carnage of COVID and did what they always do, they put the service first. And let's be clear, government councils and health boards all share the blame for the mistreatment of workers in contracted services before, during, and indeed after COVID. But it's the government who promised to fix it, and it's the government who are walking away. Personally, I think they're running away. This is their last chance to get the care service back on track, and this is what they need to do. The government must stop the ludicrous attack on social work, children's services, and local government. Focus on the job that needs to be done. Focus on fair work and fair care. If they need to get all macho with someone, stand up to the tax dodgers and the profiteers and give social care back to the people who own it and work in it. And for pity's sake, just deliver fair work and deliver it now, yesterday even. If I was Mary Madden, private consultant, I would be charging a couple of grand for that advice. I give them advice free, actually. Nice work if you can get it. State the blindingly obvious and make a fortune. Well, I'm giving the advice for free today, just like I've given so much care over the years for free. And that also, many, many project workers and care workers deliver free care to their at home, to their families and friends, because we are committed to our families. We then take that into our work, and we commit that if we treat our families well, we treat our service users well. Care workers are sick and tired of giving care for free because it doesn't let us look after our family properly. And I personally went out to work because I needed the money to support my children many years ago. I didn't go out to volunteer. I do voluntary work, but I come out to earn a wage to look after my family. Absorbing cuts and staff shortages, it's never ending. It just goes on and on and on. Holding vital services together from the goodness of their heart. I was getting paid more 12 and 14 years ago when we were fighting for better conditions than I am now. That's the reality. I would never have come into social care for the wages that are being paid now. It would have been a no-brainer. I was out for money. And that is a vital issue right now, not next year or when the National Care Service comes. Thousands of people are waiting for life-saving services now. Services we want to provide, but we have no funding and we have no staff. So I ask you to join me and send a very clear message to government. Stop the shambles. Fund fair work and care. Fund it now. Yesterday evening, I had taped Nicola Sturgeon's speech to conference, and I was waiting patiently to hear a bit of mention about social care workers, National Care Service. To be fair, there was mention of the National Health Service, which fine. No mention that National Care Services are now relying on social care services. But some of Nicola's words were, in the economic perspectives, we will get what we will get in having an independent Scotland. We can ensure fair work. We will repeal the Westminster anti-trade union legislation. That'll be interesting to see. The fair work was about the only thing that I connected with. So I hope she means fair work. There was also mention of optimism, hope, love, renewal, and reaching out. Well, it's time they reached out to our project workers and to all the project workers out there and all the unpaid carers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a very powerful contribution. Thank you. We've now got the Director of Social Work Scotland, Ben, and I've just one word to Ben. Follow that. 2 words. Follow that. Thank you.
What an unenviable task, Mary. Yeah. So I have the slot to follow you, impossible, and the slot before your coffee. So I will.
I've had the cakes, by the way.
So it is great to be here. I've also got the last slot. So all my brilliant colleagues will have said everything already that I'm going to say. And Ron skillfully dodged that by saying something new and interesting, which I'm unlikely to do. But I'll hope, I suppose, to feed the controversy a little bit and stimulate thinking. You have heard some great and important things. For those who don't know, Social Work Scotland, we're the professional association for social work leaders, so senior managers in social work. You will probably hear us reference quite a lot around the National Care Service Bill, not only because of our close involvement in the debates and discussions that have led to this point, but we're taking quite a clear position in relation to our submission to Parliament about what we think should happen to the bill, which I'll come to. But I thought I would start by situating Social Work Scotland's conversation over the past few years for this and sort of setting the context of where our position is now. We've been having a conversation about the reform of social work and social care for a long, long time in Social Work Scotland, as you have too. And following the publication of the review of adult social care, the Feely review, we engaged in that process and we responded to the recommendations with apologies. Thank you. We felt that it was a review done very quickly, done perhaps a little bit too narrowly, but we welcomed the focus that was being shown to an important area that needs change, definitely needs investment, without doubt. It's absolutely, that message could not be clearer. But in relation to the politics of where we are now, we know that it's okay, I understand no one wants to watch me, so that's fine. We understand, and we're approaching the debate now with a context that we've had parliamentary elections since the Feely review, in which a majority of parties committed to a programme of developing a national care service. So whatever one's personal feelings, and in our membership, there was quite a diversity of views. I'm not going to lie, it was a difficult conversation to facilitate within the Social Work Scotland membership off the back of the Feely review and then those initial discussions about a national care service. But we accept the status as we find it, of course. There is a democratic mandate to deliver. Our debate and question now is what that national care service looks like. So I think Ron touched on this. You know, we are not going to be taking a position as Social Work Scotland to oppose a national care service. We see the potential in building something new and different, but we're concerned about what we find in front of us now. So needless to say, we support social work and social care reform, including of structures. Structures aren't a sexy thing to talk about, but they are important. We are of the view that absolutely changes to structures are not going to deliver improvement. It's rearranging deck chairs, but rearranging chairs can facilitate greater movement around the dance floor. It might be good things. So we do need to consider structures. Structures are not unimportant. And from a social work perspective, we believe that some structural arrangement will be important to unlock the potential of social work. For some time preceding the Feely review, our membership at Social Work Scotland has been of a pretty united perspective. That the post-1996 structures for local government and more latterly health and social care integration are not fit for purpose for social work. They're not the best that we can do if we really understand the purpose and service that social work represents. Also, just want to reflect on integration. Again, Ron's lined me up quite well, that it's been challenging for social work, but it has delivered some benefits. And again, that's been really important for our membership. Actually, they've debated that long and hard, and the picture is very different around the country. We do have lots of different ways of doing integration, but for a good proportion of the Social Work Scotland membership, leaders in social work, they're acknowledging it's been difficult, but they're feeling that it's delivering benefits now, and they are self-conscious about the risk that these proposals put to that. We're also aware, I don't know, we welcome in the panel discussion hearing your views, that some of the challenges affecting social work are national in scale and require national solutions. That does not mean central government solutions, but national solutions to national problems. From entry into the profession, through career-spanning learning and development, workforce planning, numbers, recruitment and retention, where people are, the well-being of staff, the adoption of technology is a really interesting conversation. A profession of national significance requires national structures, is the conclusion we've come to. So we have campaigned, we argued to Feely, for instance, that there needs to be some sort of national structure for social work, and we gave it the name a National Social Work Agency. And so it won't surprise you that now, seeing that referenced in the policy memorandum, we will be supporting that, and we'll be working with government to develop that. It's not an uncontroversial idea in itself. It has risks, but we see the balance of benefits and risks leaning towards the benefits. We also, you all too, will as well want to see human rights and the voice of people who use services to become the foundations on which our social work and social care system is built, and the framework through which services are delivered. And it can be both. And we believe social work is absolutely the essential profession to realize that. For all these reasons, we therefore support reform. So not a position at Social Work Scotland of being anti-reform. And we intend to engage with Scottish Government and all other partners. It's really grateful to have this invitation, and been working closely with Stephen and others on that partnership with UNISON to really make sure that we're articulating the voice of people who work in services really loud and clear. But in our submission to Parliament, we have called on the government to withdraw the bill. We've asked it to be paused for a flipping round of the process, effectively. We want to lower the stakes in this discussion. It has to be built on partnership and, dare I use the word, co-design and co-production. And that is difficult to do in the situation that the legislation has now created, where the stakes for our local government colleagues are extremely high, forcing a defensive position that means we cannot have the conversations that we need to do about what reform looks like. We want to see that investment brought forward. Show that you mean it by articulating what you're going to spend on this. £500 million in the financial memorandum for the restructuring. Some of that might flow through to services, but that is a lot of money, as colleagues have already acknowledged, that we're not seeing flowing through to services and to people who need them. We also want to spend some time in a low stakes environment, as much as any structural reform can be low stakes, but understanding how current structures have been working or not. Feely made some pretty throwaway comments about integration is a better form, and areas that are fully integrated with all of their services are superior to others. We haven't seen the evidence base for that. Might be true, might not be true, but we have the opportunity to investigate that and to understand maybe there is a reform towards a national care service that builds on what we've already done. We don't just simply throw it away. And that's the conversation that we want to have as Social Work Scotland. Legislation should come at the end of that process, and then we move on to implementation. This position that I've tried to articulate, probably badly, but I hope that it sort of captures the Social Work Scotland membership's views. And it's a position which has emerged out of a number of discrete concerns, and I'll rattle through these, but happy to answer any questions about them on the panel. The financial memorandum that we've already noted. So we've got a piece of legislation accompanying that financial memorandum that doesn't articulate what we're going to spend on these services, and it doesn't capture in any way the complexity of what is proposed. And the answer back, and I have had quite a lot of engagement with the Scottish Government over these questions, is it's a framework bill, so we don't know what these things are going to cost. So it's an accurate representation of what's in the bill, and that's true. That is true. I'm an ex-civil servant. That's absolutely true. But that's not a satisfying answer to me. This is about investment in services. This is about significant public service reform. Colleagues have already cited the quote which ministers have said about this being the most significant public service reform since the setting up of the NHS. We need to know the numbers then that we're about to embark on. And I think particularly for the people who use services, that must be central. How is the situation going to change? Or are we simply going to be taking the money that currently goes through local government and putting it through a new system? And I think our conclusion, probably shared by most of you, is that that's not going to see a qualitative difference for people if that's the case. We also have some legislative concerns. I call them constitutional almost. Framework bills are not a good way of making law. And you can spend time reading documents from many parliaments around the world. This is just not a good way of going about legislation. Legislation which emerges as a result is poor. The implementation of legislation is poor. And actually what we should be doing is debating, getting to the details. The scrutiny of Parliament, as an earlier colleague said, is absolutely essential. I've already referenced the practical challenge that this approach represents in raising the stakes and pushing people into hard defensive positions that makes conversations difficult. And I think that is really problematic. Social work, the 6,000 or so social workers that are employed by local government find themselves in an invidious position now of having to try and navigate some of these politics and dynamics. And we would like to see social work being enabled to engage in this conversation as freely as it can be. I think social work does want reform in the main. I know if my colleagues were here from the Scottish Association of Social Work, they would be saying that too. There is a clamour for change, changes to terms and conditions, changes to many things, but that's not mediated by this approach that's being taken. The scope of this is not yet determined, and I missed some of the earlier contributions, but I assume that's already been covered. Mary covered it. No decisions yet about justice social work, no decisions yet about children and family social work. There is a great risk that we are going to build a national care service, which is an older people's, not even adults, an older people's national care service with other bits tacked on. And that is not good for anyone. If we want to build if the decision taken is to include all of those, we should build the national care service from after that decision. So there are processes underway, we can critique them and discuss them in a bit, but let's move forward on legislation and stuff once we've taken those essential decisions that really matter. Some specific social work points. Public protection, essential social work role. Nowhere in the bill, nowhere really in the policy memorandums and accompanying documents. And the membership of Social Work Scotland really have not felt through the documents that have been published, but also our engagement with Scottish Government to date, that policymakers fully understand the duties and powers that are being taken on with this change, and the need for the safeguards that come with those duties and powers. These are significant powers, the powers to detain people of their liberty. Few professional groups have that power, social workers do. And we really need the debate about whether a national care service is going to be as good or better than local government currently has been, and the structures that are built around local government over many years to do that. More generally, where social work fits in with this. You know, it is the bill itself, which is the bit we should be scrutinising, because it's all well and good, the other documents, but the thing that's being debated in Parliament is the bill, not the other documents. And the intentionality of what ministers do is interesting and of merit, but it's what's in the bill that really matters. And there's no references to social work in there. There's nothing in there that gives reassurance to us that the problems that social work faces now, and it does face issues now in the current structures, are going to be addressed by this. And we've been given reassurance, and that's welcome. And I don't disbelieve civil servants and ministers in wanting to address these things. But our position at the moment is that this approach that's being taken through the bill is not the best way to try and attend to those. Possibly the opposite. Possibly this will cement, for instance, a feeling among some social workers that they are an adjunct profession to health colleagues in facilitating delayed discharge. It's the role of some social workers to say, no, that person shouldn't be discharged. There may be a care package available for them, but it's not in their interest to go to that care package. That needs an empowered and confident social worker to do that. And I think it's a legitimate fear of some of our members, possibly some of yours too within UNISON, that social workers will now feel sublimated and under pressure to address delayed discharge, get the people out. And so again, those are the kind of safeguards that we want to be reassured. Social work will be protected from any undue pressure in that way to address political problems, so you can defend individuals' human rights. I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to try and articulate any of those bits as I can. People were talking about having to dodge the BBC. I literally had to dodge them on the stairs on the way up. Colleagues, thank you again for having us here, and I look forward to the conversation to follow.
Thanks very much, Ben, and thanks to all our speakers. We're about to go to a comfort break, colleagues. You've got on your programme 30 minutes. I'm going to suggest that we curtail that slightly and perhaps come back at 2:50. That will give us a bit more time to enter into the broader discussion, and I'm really keen to hear from colleagues in the room, as I'm sure on the panel, so that we can respond to some of the questions that you've got. So 2:50 back in here to start the second part of the afternoon session. And just a reminder that if you do want to participate in the UNISON Scotland campaign around the National Care Service, colleagues at the back of the room will give you the information that you need to sign up to support that campaign. Thank you.